Hi.
It was 8:15 in the evening when Isabel dropped the bomb. The air in the house was thick with an almost uncomfortable silence, something that had been brewing for weeks. I could sense it, the distance between us. It wasn't anything overt, no shouting, no coldness, just a subtle shift. A shift that I ignored, hoping it would go away on its own. But this was different. She had told me she was going out, but she was always vague about where. I had grown used to it. She'd mention vague meetings or appointments with friends, things she never seemed to mention in detail. I didn't ask because I was afraid of what I might hear. That evening, I sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself. I had already eaten, alone, a meal I made for myself while Isabel was away, as usual. When she walked in through the front door, the first thing I noticed was her face. She had this look, calm but distant. It wasn't the I'm home look I had grown accustomed to. There was something almost rehearsed about it. Isabel had always been open with me in the past. We'd had our rough patches, sure, but we always worked through them. But this was different. She took off her jacket and tossed it onto the chair next to the door before walking past me without a word. She didn't even acknowledge me with a simple hi, or, how was your day? She just moved like a ghost through the room. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I followed her, trying to make sense of it. Isabel? I called after her, my voice hesitant but firm. She didn't turn around immediately. When she finally did, her expression was unreadable, almost like she had been rehearsing this moment in her mind. Then, without a word, she sat down at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. My heart began to pound. I could feel the tension in the room, thick like a storm about to break. I'm not going to be home until Friday morning, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something about the way she said it that made me feel uneasy. I'm going away. I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. Going away? For work? No, she said softly, her eyes avoiding mine as if trying to hide something. For myself. I need some time. Time to think, to breathe. I felt a sudden unease in my chest. I didn't understand. Isabel had always been a creature of habit, stable, grounded, always there for me. But this was different. The word, I need some time, echoed in my head, and everything inside me screamed that there was more to this. So much more. She must have seen the confusion on my face because she quickly added, it's not what you think, Nathan. She spoke my name carefully, almost as if she was trying to calm me. It's just that, well, I've been feeling lost. I need to feel something again. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. Lost? Isabel was lost? How could she say that? Everything had been fine, hadn't it? We had our problems, sure, every marriage did, but we were stable. We loved each other, didn't we? You're not making sense, I said, my voice rising slightly, a mixture of frustration and hurt creeping into my tone. What do you mean, lost? What's going on, Isabel? She hesitated, looking down at the table as if gathering the strength to say something she had been holding back. I could see the struggle in her eyes. I had no idea what was coming next. I've been seeing someone, she finally said, almost in a whisper. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. My breath caught in my throat, and the air in the room suddenly seemed to shrink. Everything became sharper, the sound of my heartbeat louder in my ears. It was as if the world had tilted, and I was left stranded, hanging off the edge. What do you mean, seeing someone? I forced the words out, though my throat felt tight. I couldn't even focus on her face anymore. All I could hear was the deafening silence between her words. I've been having an affair, Nathan, she said plainly, as if she were telling me she was going to the store to buy groceries. An affair. The words felt foreign. A part of me refused to process them, as if hearing them out loud would somehow make them less real. What? I managed to ask, though the question felt absurd. I didn't want to hurt you, Isabel continued, her voice becoming quieter, more fragile. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep both of you in my life, but it's too much. I've been lying to you. I've been lying to myself. I staggered backward as if I had been physically struck. I had no words. The room felt as if it were closing in on me. My breath quickened, and my mind was racing to catch up with the reality that had just been thrust upon me. She saw the look in my eyes, the betrayal etched in every inch of my face, and she moved toward me. "Please, Nathan. I never wanted this. You have to understand, he makes me feel alive again. He makes me feel like I'm not just your wife, your mother of your children. He sees me." Something inside me snapped at that. I wasn't even sure if it was anger or sadness, but it was a wave, a rush of emotion that I couldn't control. "He makes you feel what? Alive?" I scoffed, though my voice cracked. "What about me, Isabel? What the hell do you think I've been doing all this time? What am I to you?" She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she let her head drop, her eyes focused on the floor. "I needed space," she said quietly, almost apologetically. "I didn't know how to tell you. So you disappear for days at a time? You lie to me about where you're going? And you think that's how you fix things?" I was practically shaking, the anger building inside me like an uncontrollable fire. "You think I won't find out? You think I wouldn't notice?" Isabel opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was clear she hadn't prepared for this part, the confrontation. She was caught off guard, as if she had thought this would go differently. But she had miscalculated. I wasn't the same person I had been when I started this marriage. Her phone buzzed on the table. For a moment, we both glanced at it. I saw the notification light up, and something in my chest clenched. She hesitated for a moment before looking at me. "It's him," she said simply. I have to go." I couldn't breathe. I watched as she grabbed her bag and stood up, moving toward the door. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. "You'll come back on Friday?" I asked, almost stupidly, trying to hold onto the thread of hope I didn't even realize I still had. She didn't answer, just walked out, leaving me standing there. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. I sank into the chair she had been sitting in, staring at nothing. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I had no idea what I was supposed to do with all of this. The door slammed shut behind Isabel. I stood there for a moment, frozen. It felt as though the world had stopped moving, or maybe it was just me. My thoughts swirled, a maelstrom of confusion, disbelief, and a bitter, gnawing rage. But beneath all of it, there was something else, a strange, almost calm detachment, as if I had stepped outside myself and was watching the scene unfold from a distance. I knew the anger would come, I could feel it bubbling beneath the surface, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let it take me. This wasn't going to be one of those screaming matches where emotions ruled, where I let her manipulate me into becoming something I wasn't. I wasn't going to play the role of the heartbroken husband, the betrayed man who couldn't see past his own feelings. No, I was done with that. I was done being the one who responded to every emotional outburst, to every manipulative gesture. I wasn't going to beg for answers or plead for her love, the way I had done in the past when things started to go wrong. I wasn't going to fall into the trap of pleading for her to stay or even ask her why she'd done this. I wouldn't let her see how much she had hurt me. I wouldn't give her that power. I took a deep breath, and for a brief moment, I felt the weight of everything lifting. The world felt smaller now, contained, almost manageable. There was nothing more I needed to say. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't play her game. The phone buzzed on the table again. The sound was almost like an invitation, but I didn't move to pick it up. I knew who it was, and I knew what he wanted. It was him, the man who had stolen her from me. I could feel my hands start to tremble, but I forced myself to remain still. I didn't answer. For the first time in our marriage, I was in control, not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. If she wanted to leave, let her. If she wanted to follow her own desires and abandon everything we had built, then fine. But I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to scream at her, accuse her of everything I was thinking, and I certainly wasn't going to fall to my knees in front of her, begging for something that was already gone. I'd prefer not to, I muttered under my breath. The words came easily, almost instinctively. It wasn't a direct response to her, but a response to the situation. I had no desire to fight her or even confront her about it. It felt almost Right, the way Bartleby had said it in the old Melville story. A quiet defiance. A refusal to participate in the absurdity of this life that had been forced upon me. I had spent so much of my life reacting, being swept up in the emotions of the people around me. My entire existence had been defined by my relationships, by Isabel, by my children, by the expectations that society placed on me as a husband, a father, a provider. And in a way, I had played those roles well. I had kept my promises. I had been loyal. I had been the man she could lean on. But in the end, none of that mattered. She had made her choice. She had decided she needed someone else, and I couldn't change that. But I could control how I responded. So I sat down on the couch, staring at the phone in front of me, willing myself not to move. I wouldn't pick it up. I wouldn't let the temptation of knowing what Isabel was doing pull me into her world of lies and betrayal. I wouldn't let it pull me back into the chaos. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I couldn't be sure. Time didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I wasn't going to allow her to drag me into a pit of emotion and confusion. I wasn't going to beg for her love. I wasn't going to shout at her. I wasn't going to chase her or cry over her. She had already made her decision. I had never realized how much control I had until that moment. It was liberating in a strange way. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street outside. The city lights glowed in the distance, 1,000 miles away from me, as if I were no longer a part of it. Everything felt distant, like I had been removed from it all, floating above it, watching it all from a cold, impassive place. I thought about Isabel, the woman I had loved for so long. The woman who had once been my everything. How had we ended up here? How had I missed all the signs? How had she hidden her affair from me for so long? And yet, in some ways, it didn't even matter. The answers would only make the pain sharper, more real. I didn't need them. I had made a choice. I would let her go. There was no dramatic confrontation in my future. No desperate phone calls or attempts to manipulate her emotions. There was nothing left to fight for, and I was finally okay with that. Goodbye, Isabel, I whispered to myself. It wasn't just her I was saying goodbye to. It was everything. The person I had been, the life I had built with her. I couldn't bring myself to hate her, nor did I feel the desperate need to salvage what we had. In a way, I had already let go long before she had said the words. She was just the one who finally said it out loud. I turned away from the window and went to the kitchen, opening the fridge and pulling out a bottle of wine. I needed a drink, but more than that, I needed silence. I needed space from all the noise in my head, from the endless thoughts that tried to drown me. The glass felt heavy in my hand, the red liquid swirling lazily in the dim light. I took a slow sip, savoring the warmth as it spread through me. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. I wasn't sure what came next. I didn't know how this story would unfold, what would happen in the days to come. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her, or him, or anyone else, have control over me. Not anymore. I'd prefer not to, I said again, this time louder, more definite. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. The knock on the door came late the next afternoon, just as I was finishing a quiet dinner, the kind of meal that didn't really require much attention. Simple, easy. My mind had been strangely clear since Isabel left. I'd spent the last 24 hours in a kind of numb serenity. The weight of betrayal still hung there, a heavy shadow in the back of my mind, but there was something more powerful than pain, detachment. I was distancing myself, pulling away from the wreckage of what had been our marriage. The idea of a confrontation, of any kind of drama, felt unnecessary now. When I opened the door, there she stood, Isabel. For a moment, I just stared at her, taking in the way she looked, slightly disheveled, but still as poised as ever. She had that look, the one I had seen on her so many times before, calm, almost too calm. She was carrying a small handbag, her eyes a little too bright, a little too focused. She had rehearsed this. She wasn't here to apologize, she was here for something else. You've been avoiding my calls, she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. I stepped aside and let her in, not bothering with a response. I didn't owe her anything anymore. I wasn't interested in her excuses, her explanations, or her manipulations. But I let her speak anyway, because I knew that's what she was here for. She needed to justify herself. She needed me to understand, or at least pretend that I did. And for her sake, I knew she would try to manipulate me. She glanced around the room, assessing it almost clinically, like she was trying to gauge my emotional state, if there was any sign that I might still be vulnerable. But I didn't show anything. I kept my face blank, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of seeing my inner turmoil. I understand that you're upset, Nathan, she began, folding her hands in front of her, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes. But I need you to understand that this isn't something I just decided on a whim. This is what's best for both of us. I narrowed my eyes. Best for both of us? I repeated, the bitterness creeping into my voice. You've been having an affair for months, Isabel. And now, you think what's best for us is you walking away and leaving me in the dark. She flinched just slightly, but quickly recovered. Nathan, I'm not leaving you in the dark. I'm being honest with you now. You don't see it, but this decision will make our relationship stronger. I swear to you, it'll give us both the space we need to breathe and rediscover who we are individually. Only then can we come back together as equals, not as codependent, not as two people who lost themselves in each other. Her words were careful, calculated. I could see it now. She had planned this. She wanted me to buy into the idea that this affair, this betrayal, was somehow part of a greater, more noble purpose. She wasn't just running off with another man. She was finding herself. She wasn't tearing our family apart. She was making room for our relationship to improve. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Is that what you think? That I'll just sit here and accept this? That you can waltz back in here, promising me that everything's going to be better somehow? She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she pressed on, almost coldly. It's not just a promise, Nathan. It's a fact. I've already thought this through, and I believe it's what we both need. You can't be so blind to think that this marriage wasn't suffocating us. You know that as much as I do. I was unhappy, you were unhappy, and now we have a chance to fix it. But only if we both take a step back. My pulse quickened. There was the ultimatum, the subtle threat. She paused, letting her words hang in the air for a long moment before continuing. Look, Nathan, I'm not asking you to just forgive me and forget everything. I'm asking you to accept the reality of our situation. But if you can't, if you continue to fight me on this, we'll have a bigger problem on our hands. I want us to work this out amicably, but if you're going to make this difficult, I'll have no choice but to invoke the prenup. I froze. The prenup. That small, almost forgotten document we had signed before our wedding, back when everything seemed so far away. At the time, it felt like a formality, something that was supposed to reassure both our families. I never thought I'd have to think about it again. You're threatening me? I asked quietly, my voice steady but edged with a thin layer of disbelief. It's not a threat, Nathan, Isabel said, her tone unflinching. It's a reality. If you refuse to accept the divorce and try to fight me on this, the prenup is there to protect me. You've always known what it said. You knew the consequences if we ever reached this point. I didn't respond right away. I was still processing the weight of her words. The prenuptial agreement wasn't just a legal formality, it was the key to everything she wanted now. If she invoked it, I'd lose everything. I thought we were past that, I said almost to myself. You said we'd always make decisions together. You said we'd always talk about things before they got to this point. And I did, Nathan, she replied quickly, as if she had been waiting for me to say that. I've been talking to you, but you weren't listening. You refused to listen, so I had to make the decision myself. I'm doing this for us, for you too. But if you fight me on this, if you make it ugly, then we'll both pay the price. Her eyes locked onto mine, daring me to challenge her. It wasn't just about her and me anymore. It was about control. She had already decided what she wanted. She wanted her freedom, but she wanted to make sure she didn't lose the security that came with it. If I fought her, if I contested the divorce, she'd use the prenup to take everything from me. I could feel the anger rising again, but I tamped it down. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about calculation. Isabel was playing her hand, and she was playing it well. But I wasn't going to be her pawn. Not anymore. I'd prefer not to, I said again, the same calm defiance I had used the day before. But this time, it felt different. It felt like the only thing I had left. I wasn't going to fight her on her terms. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into making the wrong choices. Fine, she said, her voice tight now, her gaze flickering with a mixture of frustration and something else. Fear, maybe? I didn't know. But she wasn't going to break me. But don't say I didn't warn you. She turned to leave, but I didn't say anything more. I just watched her go, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood there in the silence that followed, not sure of anything, except that for the first time in a long while, I was no longer going to let anyone control my life. It had been 2 days since Isabel's last visit, and she hadn't contacted me since. I didn't expect her to. I didn't want her to. It wasn't that I was angry, at least, not in the way I had expected myself to be. I wasn't shaking with rage or obsessed with how wronged I had been. I felt detached. Her words, her threats, her justifications, were slipping through me like water, harmless and cold. I wasn't interested in her manipulations anymore. The more she tried to reach me, the more distant I became. It was the only way I knew how to keep control. The phone had stayed silent for the past couple of days. No messages, no calls, not even a word from the children. It was eerily quiet, and for once, I wasn't bothered by it. Silence, I realized, was my sanctuary now. I wasn't going to let her dictate how I felt, how I should respond. I had started to get used to it, this new reality where Isabel wasn't a constant presence in my life. The house felt different, but not in a painful way. It was like a weight had been lifted. I walked through the rooms without the usual tension in the air. I didn't know where she was, or who she was with, and for the first time in months, I didn't care. But then, on the 3rd day after her last visit, she showed up again. She stood at the door, her face tight and drawn, as though she had just come from a long, exhausting journey. She didn't seem surprised to find me standing there, waiting. There was no frantic knocking, no emotional plea this time. Just the usual calm, controlled presence of Isabel, the same woman I had once known, but now so different. She had the same handbag, the same poised posture, but there was something new in her eyes, uncertainty. I didn't ask her to come in. I didn't need to. She walked past me without a word, her steps slow, deliberate. She didn't even glance in my direction. The house was so quiet that I could hear the rustle of her clothing, the soft tap of her heels on the floor. She stopped near the kitchen counter, turning to face me. There was a tiredness in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Isabel had always been someone who controlled her emotions, who held herself together with an iron grip. But today, there was a crack in that facade. "I've been thinking, Nathan," she began, her voice soft but firm. "About everything." I didn't respond immediately. There was nothing I could say that would make a difference. Instead, I just stood there, watching her with the same impassive expression I had worn the last time she left. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was just empty. A void where everything had once been. "I know I've hurt you," she continued, not looking at me directly. "And I know you don't understand why I did what I did. But you have to believe me when I say it wasn't easy. This wasn't just about me wanting to be with someone else. It was about me needing something I couldn't find with you. Something I thought I could never have again." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Isabel was talking, but I wasn't really listening. I didn't care about her reasons anymore. I wasn't interested in hearing the justification. The truth was, I'd heard enough of her explanations to know they were hollow. She took a step closer, her voice becoming more pleading now. "Nathan, please. Don't shut me out. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm doing this because it's what's best for both of us, I swear. This isn't just about me. It's about us finding ourselves so we can come back together, stronger. Don't you want that?" I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Her words, like the others, slid off me without leaving any mark. What was she asking me to believe? That her affair had been a form of self-discovery? That abandoning everything we had built was some kind of necessary step to a better future? It sounded absurd. But even as I stood there, unmoved, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. She wasn't convinced of her own words anymore. The confidence she had walked in with was beginning to crack. She reached for my hand. It was the first time she had made any physical move towards me since everything had come to light. I could feel her fingers trembling as they brushed against my skin, but I didn't pull away. I didn't acknowledge her touch. I couldn't. It was like everything she had done had stripped her of any real power over me. She was no longer the woman I had loved. She was just a stranger now. I don't know if I can forgive you, Isabel, I said, my voice low and even. But I've already let you go. I'm not angry. I'm not hurt. I'm just She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, Isabel was speechless. The silence between us grew heavy, thick, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Is that really how you feel? She asked, her voice breaking just slightly. There was a quiver in her words, an unspoken fear that she had been desperately trying to ignore. You've really let me go? I nodded. I didn't need to explain myself further. Her face contorted for a brief moment, a flicker of emotion crossing her features. There was regret there, but also something else, something that made her seem vulnerable. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected me to be so calm, so unmoved by her actions. You're just going to keep saying that? She asked, almost pleading. I'm asking you to understand. I need you to understand. Why won't you? I didn't answer. I'd prefer not to, I said, the words coming out softly, but firmly, as if they had been rehearsed 1,000 times in my head. Her breath hitched. She recoiled slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though my response had hit her harder than any of the arguments we had had before. She stepped back, and for a moment, I saw her struggle to hold herself together. You're still so cold, Nathan, she whispered, the words filled with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. How can you be so calm? How can you just shut me out like this? I'm not shutting you out, Isabel. I'm just choosing not to participate, I said, my voice steady. I've already made my choice. I don't need to justify it to you. Her eyes darted away, a tear welling in the corner of her eye, but she quickly wiped it away, as if angry at herself for showing any weakness. The mask she had so carefully crafted was beginning to slip, and I didn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. She had chosen this path, and now she was the one who had to walk it alone. I'd prefer not to, I repeated, the words simple, cold, but laced with a quiet finality. Isabel said nothing more. She turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in days, I felt the weight of her absence like a breath of fresh air. It wasn't anger I felt, or even sadness. It was peace. It was the following afternoon when Isabel came again. I had been in the study, flipping through some old books, trying to keep myself busy, trying to stay in control. I wasn't sure what I expected her to say, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The knock on the door was soft but insistent. I didn't move at first. The sound of it seemed distant, like a reminder that life outside was still happening, while I had been living in this suspended, almost numb space. I could feel the dull ache in my chest, but it wasn't the sharp pain I thought I would feel. It wasn't betrayal that hurt anymore. It was just the weight of everything settling in. When I opened the door, there she stood, the same poised Isabel, but different. Her eyes were red, tired, and swollen, as though she had been crying maybe for hours. She had that look again, the one I had seen when she first confessed everything, the one that said she had come to beg for forgiveness, to somehow undo the damage she had done. I need to talk to you, she said quietly, her voice trembling. She stood in the doorway, not entering the house, waiting for some kind of invitation, some sign that I still cared enough to listen. I said nothing. I didn't need to say anything. My silence was enough. I know you don't want to hear this, she continued, her eyes searching mine as though she could somehow find the pieces of me she had broken. I know that what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to understand why I did it. Nathan, please? She stepped inside without waiting for my response. I didn't stop her, didn't make any move to close the door. She seemed too fragile in that moment, too vulnerable, and it made me feel something I couldn't quite place. But I didn't let it get to me. I wasn't going to fall into the trap of trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. I was so unhappy, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I thought I could find what was missing, and for a while I did. But it wasn't real. I thought I could keep both parts of my life separate, but it was never going to work. I thought I was doing this for us, to give us both space, but I was wrong. I see that now, Nathan. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't need to hear any more of her explanations. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. What I felt was the quiet exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for too long, for something that was never going to return. I know I've hurt you, she said, stepping closer, her voice soft but desperate. I've lost you and I'm so sorry. I can't take back what I've done, but I want to try and fix it. I want us to have a chance to rebuild. Please let me try. She was looking at me now, her face full of regret, her eyes begging for something, anything. She was asking for forgiveness, but I had no words to give her. There was nothing to say. Nothing that could undo what had already been done. I stood there, watching her, feeling that same detachment I had felt the moment she left. Her tears, her apologies, they didn't move me. She had made her choice long ago. She had abandoned the very foundation we had built together, and now, she wanted to rebuild it with empty words. I'd prefer not to, I said, the words coming out quietly but firmly. It was all I could say. Isabel's face crumbled for a moment, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of my indifference had hit her harder than anything she had expected. She opened her mouth to say something more, but I didn't let her. I'm done, I added simply. There's nothing left to fix. She stood there for a moment longer, looking as though she wanted to say more, but nothing came. She turned and left without another word, and the door clicked softly behind her. The house was silent again. And in that silence, I felt the last of the emotional knots in my chest begin to loosen. Isabel was gone, and with her, the last traces of the man I had been before. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing but peace.
Bye.